Imagine being the most powerful ruler in the ancient world, worshipped as a living god, only to vanish suddenly at the age of just 19. No warning, no clear explanation, just a tomb sealed in haste and a legacy shrouded in whispers. This is the story of Tutankhamun, the boy king whose name echoes through history, not for the life he led, but for the mystery of his death. When his tomb was discovered in 1922, the world was captivated by the glittering treasures within, but hidden beneath the gold and grandeur was a darker puzzle. How did this young pharaoh meet his end? Was it illness, accident, or something far more sinister? For centuries, historians have pieced together fragments of evidence, each clue raising more questions than answers. The ancient Egyptians were meticulous record keepers, yet Tutankhamun's final days are strangely absent from their scrolls. His burial was rushed, his name nearly erased from history, and his mummy bears strange injuries that don't quite fit the official story. Some believe he was murdered, a victim of royal betrayal. Others point to a tragic accident or a hidden illness, but one thing is certain. The truth has been buried for over 3,000 years, wrapped in layers of myth and deception. What if I told you that modern science might finally crack this ancient case wide open? From CT scans revealing hidden fractures to DNA testing uncovering family secrets, we're closer than ever to solving one of history's greatest cold cases. But the deeper we dig, the more twists emerge. Was Tutankhamun's death just a tragic footnote, or the key to a conspiracy that reshaped an empire? Strap in, because we're about to journey into the shadows of the pharaohs, where every clue leads to another enigma, and the past refuses to stay silent. Tutankhamun ascended to the throne at just 9 years old, thrust into power during one of ancient Egypt's most turbulent eras. His father, Akhenaten, had upended centuries of tradition by abandoning the old gods, declaring the sun disk Aten as the supreme deity, and moving the capital to a brand new city called Amarna. But this radical shift left the kingdom divided, priests of the old religion disgraced, foreign alliances neglected, and the people uneasy. By the time Tutankhamun took the throne, Egypt was a fractured empire desperate for stability. Yet the boy king's reign, though brief, became a bridge between chaos and restoration. He changed his name from Tutankhaten, which honored his father's god, to Tutankhamun, a clear nod to Amun, the once dominant deity his father had rejected. With the guidance of powerful advisors, he moved the capital back to Thebes, reopened the temples, and began repairing Egypt's fractured identity. It was a delicate balancing act, reconciling his father's controversial legacy while steering the kingdom back to its roots. But why does a pharaoh who ruled for only 9 or 10 years, left no major military victories, and built no grand monuments still capture our imagination? Because Tutankhamun's reign was a turning point. His death marked the end of the Amarna bloodline, leaving no heir and plunging Egypt into a succession crisis. The very haste of his burial, his tomb smaller and less elaborate than those of other pharaohs, suggests his passing was unexpected, even suspicious. And that's where the real mystery begins. If his rule was meant to restore order, why was his legacy nearly erased? Why were his monuments reused by later kings? The answers might lie not in what he achieved, but in the secrets his death left behind. The year was 1922, in the Valley of the Kings, a place already picked clean by centuries of treasure hunters and archaeologists. Most believed there was nothing left to find. But British archaeologist Howard Carter refused to give up. Backed by his wealthy patron Lord Carnarvon, he spent years digging through the scorching Egyptian sands, convinced that one last royal tomb remained hidden. Then, on November 4th, his team struck something unexpected, a step cut into the rock. As they cleared the debris, more steps emerged, leading down to a sealed doorway stamped with the unmistakable seal of the royal necropolis. Carter's hands must have trembled as he made a small hole in the door, holding up a candle to peer inside. What he saw would change history. Can you see anything? Carnarvon asked. Yes, Carter whispered. Wonderful things. Beyond that door lay a treasure beyond imagination. Golden chariots, jeweled statues, alabaster vases, and at the center, the sarcophagus of Tutankhamun himself. This was the first, and to this day, the only pharaoh's tomb ever found virtually intact, its treasures untouched by grave robbers. The world went wild. Newspapers splashed the discovery across their front pages, and suddenly everyone was talking about the boy king. But with that excitement came something darker. Just months after the tomb's opening, Lord Carnarvon died suddenly from an infected mosquito bite, and rumors of a pharaoh's curse spread like wildfire. Tabloids claimed inscriptions inside the tomb warned of death coming to those who disturbed Tutankhamun's rest. More deaths followed, or at least more stories of them. A financier involved in the expedition shot himself. Carnarvon's dog supposedly dropped dead the same night his master did. Even Carter's pet canary was said to have been eaten by a cobra, a symbol of royal vengeance. But here's the twist: the so-called curse was mostly media sensationalism. Of the 58 people present when the tomb was opened, only 8 died within the next decade, a perfectly normal mortality rate for the time. And that ominous warning carved on the tomb wall, it likely never existed. Yet the legend persists, blending fact and fiction in a way that somehow feels fitting for Tutankhamun. Because even in death, his story refuses to be simple. The untouched tomb gave us an unparalleled glimpse into ancient Egypt's splendor, but it also raised more questions than it answered. Why was his burial so hurried? Why were some artifacts crammed in haphazardly, as if the embalmers were racing against time? And most haunting of all, what secrets does his mummy still hold? The treasures of Tutankhamun's tomb dazzled the world, but the real story was lying in plain sight, waiting beneath the gold. From the moment Tutankhamun's mummy was first examined, one thing became clear: this was no ordinary royal burial. The lack of detailed records from his reign left historians scrambling for answers, turning to the only witnesses left: the body itself and the objects buried with him. Early theories about his death ranged from the dramatic to the mundane, each trying to explain why a young, seemingly healthy pharaoh met such an abrupt end. Some pointed to murder, whispering of political intrigue. After all, Tutankhamun's reign was a time of upheaval, with powerful figures like his advisor Ai and General Horemheb later taking the throne. Could one of them have removed the boy king to seize power? Others suspected illness. Ancient Egypt was no stranger to disease, malaria, infections, even genetic disorders from generations of royal inbreeding. Without modern medicine, even minor ailments could turn fatal. Then there were the accidental death theories. A fragment of bone found inside his skull hinted at head trauma, sparking speculation. Did he fall from a chariot? Suffer a blow during battle or a hunting expedition? But here's where things get complicated. The evidence is like a broken mirror. Each fragment reflects a different possibility. The same CT scans that revealed the skull fracture also showed signs of a badly broken leg, likely infected before death. Was it a chariot crash, a fall down palace stairs? Or did someone deliver that injury deliberately? Even the placement of his mummy's heart missing, unlike other royal mummies, fueled suspicions. Had it been removed to hide a wound? The truth is, early theories were often guesses shaped by the biases of their time. In the 1960s, X-rays seemed to support the murder theory, with experts claiming a blow to the head. Decades later, advanced scans contradicted this, suggesting the damage likely happened after death, during mummification or even Carter's excavation. Meanwhile, DNA testing revealed a frail young man riddled with ailments, malaria, a club foot, even a cleft palate. So was he a sickly prince whose body gave out, or a victim of foul play covered up by history? The lack of clear records isn't just an absence, it's a silence that speaks volumes. Whoever controlled the story of Tutankhamun's death may have rewritten it entirely. The 1968 X-ray examination of Tutankhamun's mummy marked a turning point in the mystery of his death. For the first time, modern technology pierced the veil of 3,000 years, revealing startling details hidden beneath the linen wrappings. The images showed something shocking, a fragment of bone loose inside the skull, along with what appeared to be a thickening near the base, as if from a hemorrhage. To the team of scientists led by anatomist Ronald Harrison, the evidence seemed clear. Tutankhamun had suffered a severe blow to the head, likely the fatal injury that ended his life. Suddenly, the whispers of murder grew louder. If the boy king had been struck down, who would have dared or benefited? Suspicion fell on two powerful figures, his advisor Ai and General Horemheb. Ai, an elderly official who had served under Tutankhamun's father, swiftly assumed the throne after the young pharaoh's death, even marrying his widow to legitimize his claim. Horemheb, the military leader, eventually became pharaoh himself, erasing Tutankhamun's name from monuments as if trying to wipe him from history. The timing was damning. A young king dies unexpectedly, and his closest advisors rise to power in rapid succession. Was this mere coincidence or the trail of a carefully plotted coup? But the skull fracture theory wasn't without its critics. Some argued the damage could have occurred post-mortem during the mummification process, when the brain was extracted through the nose, or even centuries later when Carter's team handled the fragile remains. Others pointed out that Tutankhamun's skull showed no signs of healing, suggesting the injury happened at or near death. The debate divided experts, turning the pharaoh's mummy into a silent witness court between competing narratives. What made the 1968 findings so explosive wasn't just the potential evidence of violence, it was the way it reshaped Tutankhamun's story. No longer just a sickly prince or a victim of bad luck, he became a tragic figure, possibly betrayed by those he trusted most. The X-rays painted a picture of a court filled with intrigue, where power was more valuable than loyalty. Yet for all the speculation, one question lingered. If this was murder, why was Tutankhamun buried with such lavish care? Even a usurper might fear the gods' wrath enough to honor the dead king's journey to the afterlife. The answers, like so much in this mystery, remained just out of reach. In 2005, a team of Egyptian scientists with the latest in medical technology made a breakthrough that would rewrite the story of Tutankhamun's death once again. Using a state-of-the-art CT scanner, they examined the young pharaoh's mummy with unprecedented precision, peeling back the layers of time without disturbing a single fragile bone. What they found upended decades of speculation. That infamous skull fracture, it wasn't evidence of murder after all. The damage, they confirmed, had happened after death, likely during the rough handling of his mummy, either by ancient embalmers or even Howard Carter's team centuries later. But just as one mystery faded, another took its place. Hidden beneath the wraps was something far more revealing, a badly fractured left thigh bone broken just above the knee. This wasn't post-mortem damage, the edges were jagged, with no signs of healing, meaning it happened shortly before death. The injury was so severe that modern forensic experts could almost reconstruct the moment. Picture this, a young king, perhaps riding a chariot at high speed, losing control and crashing violently. Or maybe a hunting accident in the marshes where a misplaced step could send him tumbling. Whatever the cause, the wound would have been agonizing and, in the world of ancient medicine, potentially deadly. Here's where science paints a grim new possibility. While the fracture itself might not have been fatal, the open wound would have been a breeding ground for infection. Without antibiotics, even a minor bacterial invasion could turn into sepsis, poisoning the bloodstream. Adding to this, the CT scans revealed Tutankhamun suffering from malaria, a disease that would have weakened his immune system, making him even more vulnerable. So now the puzzle shifts. Did this injury, combined with illness, create a perfect storm that his body couldn't survive? Yet some experts aren't ready to dismiss foul play entirely. A broken leg could still fit a murder scenario. What if the injury wasn't accidental, but the result of an ambush or staged hunting accident? Others point to the rushed burial as evidence of a cover-up. But here's the complicating factor. Tutankhamun's tomb contained walking sticks, suggesting he might have had a pre-existing limp. Could he have already been frail, making a fatal fall more likely? The scans revealed a club foot and other genetic issues, hinting at a lifetime of physical challenges. What makes this modern analysis so fascinating isn't just the answers it provides, but the questions it forces us to reconsider. Tutankhamun's death may not have been the dramatic assassination some imagined, but that doesn't make it any less tragic. A young man, burdened by the weight of a kingdom and his own failing health, meeting an end as ordinary as it was cruel, an infected wound in a world without mercy. Yet even now, science hasn't closed the case, because while we know more about how he died, the why remains draped in the shadows of history. The year 2010 brought another seismic shift in our understanding of Tutankhamun's life and death, when an ambitious genetic study peeled back the layers of his DNA. For the first time, scientists could peer into the very blueprint of the boy king's body, revealing secrets no ancient scribe ever recorded. What they found was startling. Tutankhamun wasn't just a victim of bad luck or foul play. He'd been fighting an invisible battle against his own bloodline. The tests confirmed he suffered from not one but multiple strains of malaria, the mosquito-borne disease that still ravages parts of Egypt today. Imagine a pharaoh shivering with fever under the weight of his golden crown, weakened by a parasite coursing through his veins. Malaria alone could explain his fatigue, susceptibility to infection, and even the walking sticks found in his tomb, tools he might have relied on during bouts of debilitating illness. But the genetic revelations didn't stop there. Tutankhamun's DNA also showed signs of Kohler's disease, a rare condition that starves the bones of proper blood flow, often causing chronic pain and limping. Combined with his previously discovered club foot, it paints a portrait of a young man who likely endured constant discomfort, his body betraying him even as he ruled an empire. And here's the cruel twist: these conditions weren't random. Generations of royal inbreeding, a practice meant to preserve divine bloodlines, had stacked the genetic deck against him. His parents were siblings, a fact confirmed by the same DNA study, amplifying the risk of inherited disorders. Yet the most haunting clue might be what these revelations imply about his final days. A body already weakened by malaria and bone disease would struggle to fight off something as severe as a fractured leg. That infection wouldn't just be dangerous, it could have been a death sentence. Suddenly, the hurried burial makes grisly sense. If Tutankhamun succumbed to sepsis, his corpse might have begun decaying unusually fast, forcing embalmers to work quickly before the body became unsalvageable. But this genetic deep dive also raises provocative questions about power in ancient Egypt. Could Tutankhamun's frailty have made him vulnerable to political machinations? A pharaoh seen as physically flawed might be viewed as spiritually compromised, a liability in a culture where the ruler's body was a conduit to the gods. His advisors Ai and Horemheb, both robust military men, might have seemed like more suitable successors in comparison. Science has stripped away the golden mask to reveal a fragile human beneath, one whose DNA tells a story of pain, resilience, and the unintended consequences of absolute power. Tutankhamun's genes, like his tomb, hold treasures far more valuable than gold. The unvarnished truth of a life lived in the shadows of greatness, cut short by forces both ancient and eerily modern. Tutankhamun's DNA didn't just reveal his own suffering, it exposed a family tragedy centuries in the making. Genetic testing confirmed what historians long suspected. His parents were brother and sister, a common practice among Egyptian royalty to preserve their divine bloodline. But this tradition came with a devastating cost. Inbreeding amplified genetic defects, passing down vulnerabilities that may have sealed the boy king's fate. His father, the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, likely married his own sister, often referred to as the younger lady mummy discovered in tomb KV35, to maintain pure royal lineage. The result, a child burdened with a club foot, a cleft palate, and a weakened immune system, all while carrying the weight of a fractured empire. The tomb itself holds silent witnesses to this genetic tragedy. Among Tutankhamun's treasures were two tiny sarcophagi, each containing the mummies of his stillborn daughters. DNA analysis shows these infants also suffered from severe deformities, including spina bifida and skeletal abnormalities, clear evidence of the consequences of generations of royal intermarriage. Imagine the grief of a teenage father already struggling to rule, facing the loss of his heirs before they took their first breath. These infants weren't just buried with him, they were wrapped in the same care as a pharaoh, their tiny bodies adorned with miniature gold masks, a heartbreaking nod to the dynasty that would die with their father. But the family's secrets run deeper. Tutankhamun's lineage traces back to Amenhotep III, whose reign marked the peak of Egypt's power and the beginning of its genetic decline. By the time Tutankhamun was born, the royal family tree had become a tangled web, with cousins marrying cousins and siblings sharing thrones. This wasn't just tradition, it was a political strategy to keep power within a closed circle. Yet each generation paid a steeper price. Tutankhamun's grandfather, Amenhotep III, lived into his 40s, a long life by ancient standards. His father Akhenaten died in his 30s. Tutankhamun barely reached 19. The pattern is unmistakable, a bloodline weakening with each iteration, like a copied manuscript fading with every pass. What makes this discovery so haunting isn't just the science, it's the human story beneath the data. Tutankhamun wasn't just a king, he was a product of a system that prized purity over survival. His walking sticks, his malformed foot, even the malaria that ravaged him, all were symptoms of a deeper rot in the royal house, and yet he clung to power, surrounded by advisors who may have seen his frailty as an opportunity. When his daughters died, so too did the last hope of his direct lineage. Within years of his death, his name was chiseled from monuments, his widow forced to marry his elderly advisor and his legacy nearly erased. The very practice meant to sustain the dynasty may have hastened its collapse. The gold masks and grand tombs couldn't hide the truth. Sometimes the greatest threats to a pharaoh came not from enemies beyond the palace walls, but from the blood running through his veins. The image of Tutankhamun charging across the desert in a golden chariot, the wind whipping his royal garments, is almost cinematic. But what if this wasn't just grandeur, but the scene of his downfall? The chariot accident theory has gained traction among modern scholars, fueled by those critical CT scan findings: the shattered femur, the crushed chest cavity, and the absence of a heart in his mummy. Picture the force required to snap a young man's thigh bone clean through, the kind of impact that could only come from a high-speed collision. Chariots, though symbols of power, were notoriously unstable. With no suspension, rough terrain could send even an experienced rider flying. And here's the chilling detail: Tutankhamun's tomb contained no fewer than 6 chariots, some showpieces, others battle-ready. Was one of these his instrument of death? Yet the accident theory isn't as straightforward as it seems. For starters, the chest injuries, collapsed ribs, and a missing heart don't neatly fit a simple crash. In ancient Egyptian mummification, the heart was typically left inside the body, believed to be weighed in the afterlife. Its absence raises eyebrows. Could the chest trauma have been so severe that embalmers removed the organ to hide damage? Or was it deliberately extracted to conceal a wound, like a spear thrust masked as crash debris? Then there's the location of the fractures. The left leg break would align with a chariot's wheel or axle striking sideways, but the chest injuries suggest a frontal impact, as if something or someone slammed into him at full force. The plot thickens when you consider who stood to gain. General Horemheb, Tutankhamun's military commander, was a renowned charioteer. If the young king died in a staged training accident under his supervision, it would explain the haste to bury the evidence literally. Ancient texts describe chariot warfare as chaotic, perfect for masking murder. A well-placed shove, a tampered harness, or a spooked horse could send a frail teenager tumbling without leaving obvious marks of foul play. And if Horemheb orchestrated it, he'd have waited years to claim the throne, letting the elderly Ai take power first, a clever delay to avoid suspicion. But skeptics argue the injuries could just as easily point to a hunting mishap. Tomb paintings show pharaohs standing in chariots while aiming bows at lions and ostriches, a precarious balancing act. A sudden jolt from a wounded animal could throw even the steadiest hunter, and Tutankhamun, with his club foot and malarial fevers, might have been particularly vulnerable to losing his footing. His tomb's abundance of walking sticks suggests he wasn't the most agile. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between accident and conspiracy. The broken leg, the malarial fevers, the genetic disorders, anyone could have made a routine chariot ride deadly. But in a court filled with ambitious advisors where power changed hands with suspicious timing, even a genuine accident might have been quietly exploited. After all, history isn't just written by the victors, it's buried with the defeated, and Tutankhamun's bones, stripped of their golden mask, tell a story far darker than any curse. Ancient Egypt's royal court was no stranger to power struggles, but the years following Akhenaten's death were particularly volatile, a tinderbox of religious upheaval and political scheming. Tutankhamun inherited not just a throne, but a fractured empire desperate for stability. And standing in the shadows were two men whose ambitions might have outweighed their loyalty. Ai, the elder statesman who'd served Akhenaten, and Horemheb, the military commander with a hunger for power. Both would wear the crown after Tutankhamun's death, and both had motives to ensure the boy king never reached his full potential as a ruler. Ai's role is especially suspicious. As Tutankhamun's closest advisor, he effectively ruled in the young pharaoh's name, controlling access to the throne like a puppet master. When Tutankhamun died, Ai wasted no time. He married the king's widow, Akhenaten, despite being decades older, a move that secured his claim to power. But here's what raises eyebrows. Royal marriages were about legitimacy, not love. Akhenaten, desperate to avoid this union, even wrote to the Hittite king begging him to send a prince for her to marry instead, an unprecedented act of defiance. The letter reads like the plea of a trapped woman. "My husband has died," she wrote, "and I have no son. They say you have many sons. Give me one to be my husband." The Hittite prince was murdered en route, likely by Egyptian forces loyal to Ai. Within months, Akhenaten vanished from history and Ai sat on the throne. Coincidence or cleanup? Then there's Horemheb, the general who bided his time. After Ai's brief reign, Horemheb seized power, launching a campaign to erase Tutankhamun's legacy entirely. He chiseled the boy king's name from monuments, reassigned his building projects to himself, and even declared the entire Amarna period, including Tutankhamun's reign, illegitimate. This wasn't just political posturing, it was systemic damnation. If Tutankhamun had lived to adulthood, consolidating power and siring heirs, Horemheb's path to the throne would have been blocked. But a childless teenager, a perfect vacuum for ambition to fill. The timing of Tutankhamun's death couldn't have been more convenient. He was on the cusp of manhood, old enough to rule without regents, yet still vulnerable. Had he survived another 5 years, he might have fathered an heir, sidelining Ai and Horemheb forever. Instead, his untimely demise cleared the way for both men to ascend. Even the burial speaks volumes. Tutankhamun's tomb, though lavish, was smaller than a pharaoh's standard, crammed with reused artifacts, a rush job. The mummy itself was drenched in excess resin, likely to mask decomposition from a delayed burial. Was someone buying time to solidify their grip on power before sealing the tomb? But here's the twist: murder in ancient Egypt wasn't just about removing a rival, it was about cosmic balance. Killing a god king risked invoking divine wrath. If I or Hormheb orchestrated Tutankhamun's death, they'd have done it subtly: a staged accident, an undetectable poison, or an illness exacerbated by neglect. The broken leg fits perfectly, a wound that could be explained with infection doing the rest. No blades, no witnesses, just a tragic twist of fate. And with the young pharaoh gone, the path to power lay open, waiting for the right hands to seize it. History may never prove foul play, but the pieces align with eerie precision. After all, in the Game of Thrones, the greatest moves are often the ones no one sees coming. Ai's rise to power was so swift it borders on rehearsed. Within days of Tutankhamun's death, this elderly advisor, old enough to be the boy king's grandfather, was carving his name into royal cartouches and sealing his claim by marrying Akhenaten, Tutankhamun's grieving widow. In ancient Egypt, marriage to a queen was more than symbolic, it was a political weapon. Akhenaten wasn't just a widow, she was the last living link to the royal bloodline, the daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. By marrying her, I didn't just take the throne, he absorbed what remained of Tutankhamun's legitimacy, but the union reeks of desperation. Akhenaten's plea to the Hittites reveals a queen fighting for any alternative. A foreign marriage would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances, yet she preferred a stranger to Ai, a man she'd known her entire life. That tells us everything. Their wedding scene, depicted in Ai's tomb, shows him performing the opening of the mouth ritual on Tutankhamun's mummy, a role traditionally reserved for the heir. It's a chilling image, the man who may have orchestrated the pharaoh's death now presiding over his afterlife, while his widow stands silently beside him. Even more damning is what came next. Ai ruled for just 4 years before his own death, but in that brief window, he systematically dismantled traces of Tutankhamun's reign. Monuments bearing the young king's name were quietly altered, his policies reversed. Then there's the curious case of Tutankhamun's funerary temple, a structure meant to honor the dead pharaoh for eternity. Archaeologists found it stripped of his name, repurposed for Ai's glory. The message was clear: the boy king was a placeholder, his legacy disposable. Yet the erasure wasn't perfect. In his haste, Ai missed spots: a carved cartouche here, a hidden inscription there. These overlooked fragments became time capsules, preserving Tutankhamun's memory against the tide of deliberate oblivion. Ironically, Ai's own tomb was looted within centuries, his mummy lost to history, while Tutankhamun's concealed burial survived nearly intact. There's a poetic justice in that. The advisor who sought to control eternity couldn't secure his own, while the king he tried to erase became immortal. But the most telling clue lies in what Ai didn't do. Despite his apparent ruthlessness, he buried Tutankhamun with staggering riches: gold, jewelry, even the iconic death mask. If he'd murdered the king, why honor him so lavishly? Unless, of course, the opulence was a smokescreen, a performance to appease the priests and people. In ancient Egypt, even a coup needed divine approval. So Ai played the grieving regent, ensuring the boy pharaoh's journey to the afterlife was flawless while quietly ensuring no one would remember who'd sent him there. Akhenaten's plea to the Hittite king is one of the most desperate and revealing documents to survive from ancient Egypt, a cry for help etched on clay tablets buried for millennia in foreign archives. Written in the diplomatic language of the time, the letter's desperation pulses through every line. "My husband has died and I have no son," the queen writes. "They say you have many sons, give me one to be my husband." The subtext is unmistakable. She'd rather marry a stranger, a foreigner, than submit to the man looming over her husband's empty throne. This wasn't just a breach of protocol, it was an act of defiance so shocking it nearly upended Egyptian diplomacy. Royal women didn't reach out to foreign powers without permission, let alone propose marriages that could dilute the sacred bloodline. Akhenaten wasn't just breaking tradition, she was fleeing for her life. The fact that she risked everything to avoid marrying I speaks volumes. If he was simply a trusted advisor, why the terror? Unless, of course, she suspected he'd played a role in her young husband's sudden death. The Hittite king, Suppiluliuma, hesitated at first. Egypt and Hatti were longtime rivals, and this request seemed too bizarre to be genuine. But after verifying the letter's authenticity, he sent his son, Prince Zananza, to marry the queen. The prince never made it. He was murdered en route, ambushed near the Egyptian border, an act historians almost universally attribute to I or his allies. Within months, Akhenaten disappeared from history, forced into a marriage with the very man she'd tried to escape. The implications for Tutankhamun's murder theory are staggering. Akhenaten's fear suggests she knew something about her husband's death that the official records omitted. If I was innocent, why would she go to such lengths to avoid him? Why would he respond by eliminating her only alternative? The letter transforms from a diplomatic oddity into a smoking gun, a widow's silent accusation against the man who stood to gain the most from her husband's demise. But here's the twist. The Hittite archives preserve Suppiluliuma's furious response to his son's murder. He accused Egypt of treachery, and some scholars believe this incident poisoned relations between the empires for decades. Ironically, I's ruthless bid for power may have weakened the very kingdom he sought to control. Meanwhile, Akhenaten's fate remains one of history's cruelest loose ends. Did she die shortly after her forced marriage, her voice erased along with her husband's legacy? Or was she quietly sidelined, a pawn sacrificed in a game she never chose to play? Her letter survives as a whisper across time, proof that even in a world of gold and gods, fear could etch itself into clay louder than any monument. The so-called Curse of the Pharaohs exploded into public consciousness the moment Lord Carnarvon, Howard Carter's financial backer, died just months after Tutankhamun's tomb was opened. Newspapers latched onto his death like vultures, spinning tales of ancient retribution. Carnarvon's passing officially from an infected mosquito bite wasn't just tragic, it was suspiciously timed. And when his dog in England reportedly dropped dead the same night, the legend took on a life of its own. Tabloids claimed a curse inscription warned, "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." Never mind that no such text was ever found in the tomb. The myth was too tantalizing to ignore, but let's dissect the hysteria. Of the 26 people present at the tomb's official opening, only 6 died within the next decade, statistically unremarkable for the era. Carter himself lived another 16 years, dying of natural causes at 64. Yet the curse narrative thrived because it tapped into something primal, the fear of violating sacred spaces. Ancient Egyptians did indeed place protective spells in tombs, not to curse intruders but to guard against demons. The real irony, Tutankhamun's burial lacked even these standard warnings. The curse was a modern invention, a cocktail of Victorian fascination with the occult and sensationalist journalism. Dig deeper and you'll find a darker truth beneath the superstition. Several deaths attributed to the curse had far more mundane explanations. Arthur Mace, a conservator on Carter's team, succumbed to arsenic poisoning, not from a pharaoh's wrath, but from the chemicals used to preserve artifacts. Another member, Richard Bethel, died of a heart attack exacerbated by obesity and stress. Even Carnarvon's fate wasn't supernatural. He'd been in frail health since a near-fatal car accident years earlier. Yet the media ignored these details, stitching together coincidences into a sinister tapestry. What's fascinating isn't the curse itself, but why we cling to it. Tutankhamun's story is already a tangle of mystery and tragedy. Why invent supernatural elements? Because curses simplify chaos. They transform random misfortune into narrative, giving order to the inexplicable. The boy king's death was shrouded in ambiguity. His curse offered the illusion of answers. even today the legend lingers, proof that our hunger for drama outweighs facts. Science may explain the fractures in Tutankhamun's bones, but it can't compete with the thrill of a 3,000-year-old vendetta. Perhaps the real curse isn't etched on tomb walls, but woven into our imagination, a reminder that some stories, once unleashed, are harder to bury than any mummy. Tutankhamun's mummification was anything but ordinary, even by ancient Egyptian standards. The process, usually a meticulously planned 70-day ritual, shows signs of being rushed, as if the embalmers were racing against time. Normally, royal mummification involved carefully removing organs, desiccating the body with natron salt, and wrapping it in layers of linen infused with sacred oils. But Tutankhamun's body tells a different story. When Howard Carter first examined the mummy in the 1920s, he noted something startling. The king's remains were drenched in an unusually thick layer of black resin, nearly gluing the linen wrappings to his skin. This wasn't just a ceremonial choice, it was a cover-up. Modern forensic analysis reveals why. The resin was poured on so hastily that it pooled beneath the body, hardening into a solid mass that cracked Tutankhamun's spine when Carter tried to lift him. Worse, the heat from the excess resin essentially cooked the mummy, charring the flesh and complicating later studies. Why such a messy, frantic job? The answer may lie in the condition of the body when it arrived at the embalmer's workshop. If Tutankhamun died unexpectedly, say, from an infected leg wound, his corpse might have already begun decomposing before preservation could begin. In a climate as hot as Egypt, decay sets in rapidly. The embalmers, facing a deteriorating body, may have slathered on extra resin to mask the smell and slow the rot, buying time to complete the process. But the anomalies don't stop there. Tutankhamun's heart, the organ central to the ancient Egyptian afterlife, was missing, an almost unthinkable oversight for a pharaoh's burial. Scans later revealed his chest cavity packed with resin-soaked linen instead. Was the heart destroyed by trauma like a chariot crash, or removed to hide evidence of violence? Even more telling, his embalmers skipped a key step. No traditional opening of the mouth ceremony was performed on his sarcophagus, a ritual meant to restore the senses for the afterlife. This wasn't just haste, it was a glaring breach of protocol, as if those burying him were more focused on hiding something than honoring their god-king. Then there's the tomb itself. Unlike other pharaohs who had decades to prepare elaborate burial chambers, Tutankhamun was laid to rest in a space noticeably smaller and less decorated. Some walls were left roughly plastered, with paintings applied directly over uneven surfaces. Even his sarcophagus appears repurposed. The gold mask doesn't quite fit his face, and hieroglyphs inside the coffin bear traces of another name scratched out. It's as if his funeral was cobbled together from spare parts, a royal send-off done on short notice. All these inconsistencies point to one unsettling possibility. Tutankhamun's death wasn't just untimely, it was inconvenient. Someone, whether Horemheb or another player in this ancient power struggle, needed him gone quickly and quietly. The rushed burial, the sloppy mummification, the reused artifacts, they're the fingerprints of a cover-up, a scramble to dispose of a king while maintaining the illusion of reverence. In ancient Egypt, even murder had to look divine. In ancient Egyptian belief, the heart wasn't just an organ, it was the seat of the soul, the key to the afterlife. During mummification, priests carefully preserved it, placing it back in the body or in a special jar so it could be weighed against the feather of Maat in the Hall of Judgment. Yet when Howard Carter unwrapped Tutankhamun's mummy, he found something shocking. The boy king's chest cavity was empty, packed only with resin-soaked linen. No heart, no jar, just a void where the most sacred organ should have been. This wasn't just unusual, it was practically sacrilegious. So why would the priests entrusted with guiding Tutankhamun to the afterlife commit such a glaring oversight? One possibility is grimly practical. The CT scans revealing Tutankhamun's shattered ribs and collapsed chest suggest catastrophic trauma. perhaps a chariot impact or a crushing blow. If his heart was pulverized beyond recognition, embalmers might have removed the remnants rather than risk dishonoring him with a damaged organ. Ancient texts describe the heart as needing to be whole for judgment. A mangled heart could doom the pharaoh's soul. But here's the twist: the same scans show no trace of the heart being destroyed. If it wasn't obliterated, where did it go? Another theory points to political sabotage. The heart's absence might not have been an accident but a deliberate act, a final insult from those who wanted to erase Tutankhamun's legacy. In Egyptian mythology, without a heart, the soul couldn't testify in the afterlife. Denying Tutankhamun his heart would symbolically silence him for eternity, ensuring he could never accuse his enemies from beyond the grave. This fits eerily well with the later erasure of his name from monuments. But even this explanation has holes. If I or Horemheb sought to dishonor him, why go through the trouble of burying him with such lavish treasures? Why not just dump him in an unmarked grave? Then there's the simplest explanation: haste. Tutankhamun's mummification was rushed, his organs possibly mishandled in the scramble to complete the burial. Perhaps the heart was lost or misplaced in the chaos, leaving embalmers to fill the gap with linen and resin. But even this fails to account for the meticulous care taken with other aspects of his burial, like the golden death mask crafted with breathtaking precision. How could the same hands that shaped that masterpiece forget the single most important organ? The missing heart remains one of the tomb's most haunting puzzles. It's a deviation so stark it feels intentional, a silent scream in an otherwise orchestrated ritual. Whether it was hidden to cover trauma, stolen to sever his voice in the afterlife, or simply lost to time, one thing is clear: Tutankhamun's journey to eternity began with a wound that never healed. And in a culture where the heart held the essence of a person, its absence speaks louder than any treasure ever could. Poison was the silent assassin of the ancient world, invisible, untraceable, and terrifyingly effective. Could this have been the weapon that cut Tutankhamun's life short? While modern science has focused on fractures and disease, toxicology whispers another possibility. What if the boy king didn't die from a fall or infection, but from something slipped into his food or wine? Ancient Egyptians were no strangers to poisons. Papyrus scrolls detail knowledge of toxic plants like hemlock, known for its paralyzing effects, and aconite, a deadly flower nicknamed Queen of Poisons. Even arsenic, a classic murder weapon throughout history, was accessible in mineral form. The real question isn't whether poison was possible, it's who would have had the means and motive to use it. Imagine a royal banquet where a trusted advisor lingers just a moment too long near the king's cup, or a physician prescribing medicine laced with something sinister. Yet proving poisoning after 3,000 years is a forensic nightmare. Unlike broken bones, toxins leave no visible marks on mummies. Modern tests have searched Tutankhamun's remains for traces of heavy metals or plant-based venoms, but results are frustratingly inconclusive. Embalming resins and environmental contamination muddy the evidence. What's more, many poisons break down over centuries, vanishing without a trace. The strongest case for poisoning isn't chemical, it's circumstantial. Look at who surrounded Tutankhamun in his final days. The power behind the throne, stood to inherit everything. Horemheb, the general, waited in the wings. Both had opportunity, both understood politics better than blunt force. Poison was the tool of courtiers, not soldiers. A discreet solution for removing obstacles without messy confrontations. But skeptics raise valid points. If Tutankhamun was poisoned, why the elaborate cover-up with a chariot accident narrative? Why not let him simply fall ill, a far less suspicious death for a frail teenager? And why bother with such a lavish burial if the goal was erasing his legacy? Perhaps the truth lies in the middle, not a dramatic murder plot, but neglect disguised as misfortune. A king already weakened by malaria and genetic disorders might have been pushed past the brink with a subtle toxin. his death written off as natural causes. One tantalizing clue lingers in the tomb itself. Among the treasures was a small, unassuming box containing what chemists identified as black goo, a mix of animal fat, plant resin, and beeswax. At first glance, it seemed like ritual ointment, but recent analysis revealed traces of castor oil plants whose seeds produce ricin, a poison so lethal that a single crushed seed could kill an adult. Was this a sacred offering or a deadly relic accidentally preserved alongside its victim? The absence of definitive proof doesn't rule out poison. It reflects the limits of our technology. For now, toxicology remains the ghost in Tutankhamun's story, a shadow without a body, a suspicion without a smoking gun. But in a world where power was won by the cunning, and where a pharaoh's meal could be his last, poison lingers as the perfect crime, one that leaves no fingerprints, only questions. Recent breakthroughs in genetic research have added yet another layer to Tutankhamun's medical mystery, sickle cell disease. This inherited condition, which distorts red blood cells into crescent shapes, could explain many of the bone abnormalities found in the young pharaoh's remains. Imagine the pain of rigid, misshapen cells clogging tiny blood vessels, starving bones of oxygen and causing chronic damage. The telltale signs are there: the necrosis in his foot bones, the lesions on his skull, even the walking sticks buried with him. These aren't just random ailments, they're textbook symptoms of a body fighting sickle cell's relentless assault. But how does this fit with previous theories? Unlike malaria or genetic disorders, sickle cell wouldn't just weaken Tutankhamun, it would reshape his entire life. The disease often triggers episodes of excruciating pain known as crises, where muscles and bones scream for oxygen. A pharaoh expected to lead military campaigns or hunt lions might have been physically incapable during these flare-ups. And here's the cruel twist: sickle cell can also increase susceptibility to infections. That infamous leg fracture, it might have been a death sentence not just because of the injury, but because his body couldn't muster the defenses to fight off the resulting infection. The sickle cell hypothesis doesn't cancel out other theories, it intertwines with them. Genetic testing already confirmed Tutankhamun's parents were siblings, a pairing that dramatically raises the risk of inherited disorders like sickle cell. Add malaria to the mix and you have a perfect storm. Sickle cell trait, which involves carrying one copy of the gene, actually offers some protection against malaria, a bittersweet advantage in a region rife with the disease. But inherit two copies and the condition becomes full-blown, trading malaria resistance for a lifetime of pain. Tutankhamun's family tree, heavy with royal inbreeding, might have handed him this genetic double-edged sword. Yet skeptics point to gaps in the evidence. While sickle cell leaves bone damage, it doesn't typically cause the specific skull abnormalities seen in Tutankhamun's scans. And without intact soft tissue, scientists can't test his blood cells directly. Some researchers argue his bone lesions align better with Kertler's disease or avascular necrosis, conditions linked to poor blood flow, but not necessarily sickle cell. What makes this theory so compelling isn't just the science, it's the human story it reveals. A teenage king groomed for divinity might have spent his reign hiding agonizing pain behind a golden mask. His walking sticks, once seen as ceremonial, could have been life-saving supports during debilitating crises. Even his rushed burial takes on new meaning. If sickle cell triggered a fatal infection, his body might have deteriorated too quickly for traditional mummification. The sickle cell hypothesis forces us to reconsider everything, not just how Tutankhamun died, but how he lived. It paints a portrait of a ruler whose greatest battle wasn't against foreign enemies or political rivals, but against his own blood. In a civilization that saw the pharaoh's body as a vessel of divine power, chronic illness wouldn't just be a weakness, it could have been a state secret. And that might be the most revealing clue of all. The very people who buried him, who wrapped his frail bones in gold, could have been hiding not just a death, but the suffering that led to it. Tutankhamun didn't just inherit a throne, he inherited a holy war. His father, Akhenaten, had turned Egypt's religious world upside down by banning the worship of Ammon and the traditional gods, forcing the entire kingdom to bow before a single deity, the sun disk Aten. Overnight, temples were shuttered, priests stripped of power, and the capital moved to a brand new city in the desert. But when Akhenaten died, the old religious order saw their chance to claw back control, and Tutankhamun, just a child, became the battleground. Could his death have been the final act of this divine rebellion? The backlash against Atenism simmered long before Tutankhamun took the throne. The priests of Ammon weren't just spiritual leaders, they were political heavyweights controlling vast estates and wealth. Akhenaten's reforms had bankrupted them, and they had every reason to fight back. Tutankhamun's early reign shows their influence creeping in. He changed his name from Tutankhaten, honoring his father's god, to Tutankhamun, a blatant olive branch to the old faith. He reopened the temples, moved the capital back to Thebes, and poured resources into restoring Ammon's desecrated statues. On the surface, it looked like surrender. But what if the priests wanted more than just concessions? What if they demanded total eradication of Akhenaten's bloodline? Here's where the timing gets suspicious. Tutankhamun's reforms were gaining momentum, but he was still young, easily influenced, possibly even a puppet of the priests. Then, at the cusp of manhood, just as he might have started asserting his own will, he died suddenly. No heirs, no clear successor, and who stepped into the power vacuum? Ai and Horemheb, both tied to the traditionalist resurgence. The speed with which Tutankhamun's name was scrubbed from monuments after his death feels less like politics and more like purification, as if the priests were cleansing Egypt of Aten's taint once and for all. But murdering a pharaoh wasn't simple. The priesthood had subtle tools, poisoned offerings, staged accidents, or even withholding medicine from a sickly king. Tutankhamun's frail health made him an easy target. A nudge in the right direction could look like natural causes. And consider this, his burial, though lavish, was crammed with reused artifacts, some bearing traces of Akhenaten's name hastily chiseled away. Was this just frugality or a symbolic purge? Even in death, the boy king was caught between two gods, his tomb a battleground of competing loyalties. The irony is crushing. Tutankhamun spent his short life trying to reconcile his father's heresy with Egypt's lost traditions. In the end, his greatest threat may not have been chariots or assassins, but the very priests he sought to appease. Because in the shadows of the temple walls, where incense hid the scent of conspiracy, devotion could be deadly. The forensic reconstruction of Tutankhamun's face is like peeling back the golden mask to meet the real boy beneath the legend. Using high-resolution CT scans of his skull, scientists and artists have collaborated to create startlingly lifelike models of how the young pharaoh may have appeared. The results are both fascinating and heartbreaking. A teenage ruler whose features reflect the very frailties that may have doomed him. One of the most striking reconstructions, based on thousands of digital measurements, shows a young man with a pronounced overbite, high cheekbones, and a slightly elongated skull, traits consistent with the genetic disorders revealed by DNA testing. His profile bears the unmistakable mark of royal inbreeding, a recessed chin and cleft palate, subtle but visible signs of a bloodline stretched too thin. The most haunting detail, his left foot reconstructed to show the inward twist of a club foot, a condition that would have made walking painful without the support of those carved canes buried beside him. These reconstructions don't just humanize Tutankhamun, they validate the medical theories surrounding his death. The slight asymmetry of his jaw aligns with the evidence of Kertler's disease, a condition that starves foot bones of blood flow, while the delicate bone structure suggests a body weakened by chronic illness. Even his skin tone, recreated using pigmentation estimates from ancient Egyptian art, shows the pallor of someone battling malaria, a far cry from the radiant god king depicted in official portraits. Yet the most revealing aspect isn't just what these models show, but how they clash with the idealized images of pharaohs. Temple carvings and statues portray rulers as muscular and flawless, their bodies symbols of divine perfection. Tutankhamun's reconstructed face, with its asymmetries and frailties, exposes the gulf between propaganda and reality. Here was a boy who ruled as a living god while likely suffering daily pain, his reign a paradox of power and vulnerability. The reconstructions also offer clues to his final days. The slightly sunken left eye socket in some models matches CT evidence of a head injury, possibly from a fall. The narrow nasal passages hint at breathing difficulties, compounding the strain of malaria. Even the positioning of his teeth suggests a lifetime of discomfort, perhaps explaining the opiates found in his tomb, not just ceremonial offerings but pain relief for a king who needed it. Seeing Tutankhamun's face recreated bridges the gap between modern science and ancient mystery. It transforms him from a golden mask into a flesh and blood figure, one whose very features tell a story of genetic legacy, hidden suffering, and a throne that may have been as much a burden as a birthright. The boy who stares back at us from these reconstructions isn't the invincible pharaoh of legend, but a human being, one whose death, whether by accident, illness, or design, feels all the more tragic when you can finally look him in the eye. Lord Akhenaten's sudden death might have been the spark that ignited the curse legend, but it was far from the only eerie coincidence surrounding Tutankhamun's tomb. Take the night the lights went out across Cairo just as Howard Carter was preparing to unseal the burial chamber. As workers pried open the doorway, the entire city plunged into darkness, leaving only flickering torchlight to illuminate the ancient treasures within. Newspapers called it supernatural sabotage, but engineers later traced it to a faulty power station transformer. Then there's the case of George J. Goode, the American financier who visited the tomb in 1923 against medical advice. Days later, he collapsed with a fever and died, his illness conveniently blamed on the pharaoh's vengeance, though doctors quietly attributed it to pre-existing pneumonia. Even nature seemed to play along with the curse narrative. When Akhenaten's canary was reportedly eaten by a cobra, a royal symbol in Egyptian mythology, on the very day the tomb was discovered, it felt like a sign too poetic to ignore. Never mind that cobras were common in Luxor, or that the story might have been embellished by eager journalists. The public craved drama, and the curse provided the perfect script. Even Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, fueled the frenzy by publicly suggesting Akhenaten's death could have been caused by elementals guarding the tomb. But peel back the sensational headlines and the so-called curse unravels under scrutiny. Of the dozens present at the tomb's opening, most lived long, uneventful lives. Carter himself worked safely on the site for 16 more years. The handful of early deaths, like archaeologist Hugh Evelyn White's suicide, were tragic but statistically unremarkable for the era. Evelyn White's final note, scribbled in blood, read, "I have succumbed to a curse," but his family later revealed his long struggle with depression. The curse's staying power says more about us than about ancient Egypt. It taps into a primal fear that disturbing the dead invites consequences. But in Tutankhamun's case, the real danger wasn't supernatural. It was the very human penchant for weaving stories from coincidence. When Carter's team found a clay tablet allegedly warning of death for intruders, they kept it quiet until after Akhenaten's passing, then admitted it might have been misplaced from another tomb. Even the mysterious deaths often had clear explanations. Akhenaten's fatal mosquito bite came from shaving over the wound, introducing infection. The curse wasn't carved in hieroglyphs, it was written in ink by reporters who knew a gripping tale when they saw one. Yet the legend endures because it transforms history into something alive, pulsing with unfinished business. Tutankhamun's gold dazzled the world, but his curse gave the discovery an edge of danger, a reminder that some secrets might be better left buried. The irony, the only true curse was the one we invented, binding the boy king forever to our fascination with the macabre. Tutankhamun's story transcends the dusty shelves of academia, leaping straight into the heart of global pop culture with a grip that won't let go. From the moment Howard Carter's candle flickered over those golden treasures in 1922, the boy king became more than a historical figure. He morphed into a symbol of mystery, wealth, and untimely death. Hollywood was quick to seize on the drama. The very first film inspired by his tomb, The Egyptian in 1954, wove his legacy into a sweeping epic, though it took creative liberties that would make historians cringe. Then came the flood of documentaries, each promising to solve the enigma of his death. From the BBC's sober analyses to sensationalized specials teasing cursed mummies and royal murder plots. But it's fiction where Tutankhamun truly thrives. Agatha Christie's short story, The Adventure of the Egyptian Tomb, played with the curse trope, while more recent adaptations like Netflix's The Pyramid twisted his legend into horror fodder. Even video games like Assassin's Creed Origins let players explore a meticulously recreated Valley of the Kings, complete with a shadowy subplot about Tutankhamun's demise. These portrayals often exaggerate the supernatural, but they tap into something real: our collective fascination with unsolved stories. The boy king's brief life and chaotic afterlife mirror the archetype of the tragic hero, cut down before his time, leaving behind whispers of what might have been. Recent years have seen a shift toward humanizing him. The 2018 miniseries Tutankhamun stripped away the golden mask to reveal a vulnerable teenager grappling with the weight of the crown, while graphic novels like The Murder of King Tut cast him as a political pawn in a deadly game. Even music hasn't escaped his influence. Pop songs and metal bands alike have name-dropped him as shorthand for ancient mystique. What makes Tutankhamun's cultural staying power so remarkable isn't just the glamour of his gold, it's the gaps in his story. Like a blank canvas, his unfinished life invites reinterpretation. Was he a victim, a warrior, a fragile boy? Each era molds him to fit its obsessions, from the curse-obsessed 1920s to our modern appetite for forensic drama. His legacy isn't carved in stone, it's written in the restless imagination of every generation that rediscovers him. And as long as his death remains a riddle, the world will keep spinning new tales, blurring the line between history and myth. Today's leading Egyptologists generally agree on one thing about Tutankhamun's death: there's no smoking gun. But the weight of evidence points to a tragic convergence of genetic misfortune and ordinary misfortune. The consensus: this wasn't a grand conspiracy or a dramatic assassination, but a frail young man whose body simply couldn't withstand the challenges life threw at him. Advanced CT scans, genetic testing, and forensic analysis have collectively dismantled the murder theories that once dominated headlines, replacing them with a more nuanced, if no less heartbreaking, narrative. The current academic view emphasizes Tutankhamun's compromised health as the foundation of his early demise. DNA sequencing confirmed a laundry list of ailments, multiple bouts of malaria, a clubbed foot, and Kürtler's disease, which ravaged the bones in his left foot. Add to this the skeletal evidence of a severe leg fracture, likely from a chariot fall, and the stage was set for catastrophe. In an era without antibiotics, even a minor infection could turn deadly, and for someone already battling chronic conditions, survival was a long shot. The genetic toll of royal inbreeding only deepened the crisis, with generations of sibling marriages weakening the bloodline like a copied manuscript fading with each replication. Yet the debate isn't entirely settled. While most scholars dismiss the idea of foul play, a vocal minority argues that the political chaos surrounding Tutankhamun's death can't be ignored. Yes, he was sickly, but why the rushed burial? Why the erased monuments? Why the suspicious rise of Ai and Horemheb immediately after? These quirks of history keep the door cracked open for skepticism. Still, the absence of definitive trauma on his mummy, no unhealed stab wounds, no conclusive signs of poisoning, makes it hard to argue for deliberate harm. Modern Egyptology leans into probability. Tutankhamun's death wasn't a single event, but the culmination of vulnerabilities. Imagine a domino stack where each piece represents a different strain on his body. Genetic disorders, infectious disease, a devastating injury. Push one and the rest collapse. His reign, though brief, was a high-stakes balancing act politically, religiously, and biologically. In the end, the greatest threat to the boy king may not have been a hidden enemy, but the very blood that made him divine. The irony is profound. Tutankhamun's tomb, meant to secure his immortality, instead preserved the evidence of his frailty. Gold masks and jeweled amulets couldn't mask the truth written in his bones. For all the splendor of his burial, his body tells a story of vulnerability, one that resonates far more deeply than any curse or conspiracy. Science has stripped away the myth to reveal a human story, and perhaps that's the most fitting legacy of all. A king who ruled as a god but died as a boy. Even after decades of research, Tutankhamun's death leaves us with more questions than answers, gaps in the story that nag at historians like an unfinished puzzle. Take that infamous leg fracture. Was it truly a tragic accident, or could it have been staged? The injury's severity, a jagged break high on the femur, suggests immense force, the kind that might come from a chariot crash at full speed. But without witnesses, how can we be sure it wasn't something more sinister? A staged hunting mishap or even a deliberate strike during a coup would leave identical marks on bone. The lack of healing tells us the wound was fresh at death, but it doesn't reveal whether the hand behind it was fate or foul play. Then there's the tomb itself. Why such a cramped, hurried burial for a pharaoh? Most royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings sprawl with towering chambers and intricate murals designed over decades. Tutankhamun's feels almost makeshift by comparison, its walls hastily plastered, some artifacts crammed in disorder. Was this a sign of respect for a king who died unexpectedly, or evidence of a cover-up? If his death was natural, why not wait to build a grander resting place? Unless, of course, someone needed him buried quickly before too many questions were asked. And what of Akhenaten, his widow and half-sister? Her desperate letter to the Hittites begging for a foreign prince to save her from marrying screams of fear, not grief. Then silence, no grave, no further records, just whispers that she might have died young or been quietly removed. If Tutankhamun's death was innocent, why did she act like a woman running for her life? Her disappearance feels less like tragedy and more like cleanup, a loose end tied off too neatly. These aren't just historical footnotes, they're the cracks in the official story, places where the evidence doesn't quite add up. Every answer we uncover seems to birth two new questions. Was Tutankhamun's reign cut short by bad luck or bad people? Did his advisors mourn him or manipulate his legacy? And why, after 3,000 years, does his story still feel so unsettlingly unfinished? The truth might be lying in wait, buried deeper than any tomb, waiting for the next clue to bring it into the light. Among the countless theories about Tutankhamun's death, some veer into the realm of pure speculation: aliens, ancient curses, even time-traveling assassins. One particularly persistent fringe idea suggests extraterrestrial involvement, pointing to the mysterious artifacts in his tomb as evidence of advanced alien technology. Proponents highlight the dagger made of meteoric iron, claiming its otherworldly origins hint at cosmic intervention. But here's what science says. Ancient Egyptians were master metallurgists who prized meteorite iron for its rarity, not its alien connection. The dagger's composition matches known meteorites found in the region, a testament to human ingenuity, not interstellar visitors. Then there's the theory that Tutankhamun was killed by a curse, not the tabloid version from the 1920s, but an actual supernatural force unleashed by angry priests. Some point to the tomb's supposed protective spells, though no such inscriptions were ever found. The truth, ancient Egyptians did use ritual texts to safeguard tombs, but these were warnings against grave robbers, not prophecies of doom. The famous Curse of the Pharaohs was a media invention stitched together from coincidences and sensational headlines. If curses were real, why did Howard Carter, the man who actually opened the tomb, live another 16 years in perfect health? Another eyebrow-raising claim ties Tutankhamun's death to a hidden prophecy or divine punishment for his father's heresy. Conspiracy theorists love the idea of vengeful gods smiting the young king, but history offers a simpler explanation. Akhenaten's religious revolution had already collapsed by Tutankhamun's reign, and the boy king spent his life appeasing the old priesthood. If the gods were angry, why wait until he'd restored their temples to strike him down? Even time travel gets dragged into the mix, with some suggesting future meddlers altered events to reshape history. But Occam's razor slices through this neatly. Tutankhamun's death fits perfectly within the known dangers of his time: disease, injury, and political intrigue. No wormholes required. The allure of these fringe theories isn't about evidence, it's about mystery. Tutankhamun's story is already a tapestry of unanswered questions, and for some, the unknown demands extraordinary explanations. But the real magic lies in what we can prove: a teenage pharaoh, his body ravaged by genetics and bad luck, whose death, whether accidental or orchestrated, changed the course of history. The truth is dramatic enough without aliens or curses. After all, the ancient world needed no help from the supernatural to be unforgiving. 3,000 years later, Tutankhamun's death still defies a tidy explanation. Was it a chariot crash that shattered his leg, sending infection raging through his malaria-weakened body? A staged accident orchestrated by ambitious advisors like Ai or Hormheb, who stood to inherit his throne? Or simply the cruel toll of generations of royal inbreeding, leaving him too frail to survive even a minor injury? The evidence pulls us in every direction. CT scans show a fractured femur but no murder weapon. DNA reveals a boy riddled with genetic disorders, yet his rushed burial whispers of political cover-ups. Even his missing heart, the key to the afterlife, feels less like an oversight and more like a deliberate silence. For every theory, there's a counter-argument. The broken leg aligns with hunting mishaps, but why then the erased monuments and the widow's desperate plea to foreign kings? The sickle cell disease explains his pain, but not the suspicious rise of his successors. And while poison leaves no trace, the ricin-laced black goo in his tomb lingers like a shadow of doubt. Science has stripped away the golden mask, yet the face beneath remains blurred, a king caught between accident, illness, and betrayal. Perhaps the truth isn't one story, but many. Tutankhamun's death could be a tapestry of misfortune. A fragile body pushed to its limits, a court buzzing with intrigue, and a single misstep that tipped the scales. Or maybe the real mystery isn't how he died, but why his legacy was so nearly erased. Was his tomb small because he died young, or because someone wanted him forgotten? Now it's your turn to weigh the evidence. Do you think the boy king succumbed to fate, or was he removed by design? Drop your theory in the comments below. We're obsessed with this ancient cold case. And if you love unraveling history's greatest enigmas, hit subscribe for more deep dives into the past's unsolved mysteries. The truth is out there, buried under layers of time, waiting for someone like you to